Hello and welcome to Bringing Education Home. I'm Herb.
And I'm Christina. And together we bring you experts and ideas to help grow healthy, happy, successful families that are both inside
And outside the box. If you like the show, be sure to follow Christina on Facebook.
And please leave us a like review on your favorite podcast platform.
Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Mindy Green. Parenting can't be that hard. Before kids, she had thought she had the whole parenting thing figured out, in part due to her background as a school social worker. Her 4 kids showed her quickly how much she had to learn. With her strong-willed oldest child leading the charge, parenting quickly became her ultimate crash course in flexibility, patience, and connection. No degree or training could have prepared her for the real-life lessons they brought into her world. Today, as a parenting coach, she draws on those hard-earned experiences to help parents of school-age children, especially tweens and teens, navigate their child's growing independence. Using the tools like DISC personality assessment, she guides parents to better understand their kids' unique personalities and the power struggles that can come with them. Together, she navigates the inevitable challenges of parenting to create a strong foundation and relationships that thrive even during the most challenging years. Mindy Green is here to help you tackle the ups and downs of parenting with a little more ease, a lot of empathy, and the occasional well-deserved laugh. Thank you very much for being here, Mindy. It is going to be a pleasure talking to you. There's a lot of things that I really like in your bio that I want to touch on. So welcome to our show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you all.
It's one of those things that as we are connecting with different coaches and different things like that, the different tools that are brought in that can be used to help families is just so amazing. And I'm glad that we have an expert, someone who knows about this assessment and things that will really help our families. And I love that you're focusing kind of on those teens and tweens, because we've been kind of bouncing back and forth on our podcast between the youngers and the olders and the in-betweens. And so thank you for being here today and sharing some of this.
Of course, I'm as I said, I'm excited to be here and to talk about, the things that sometimes we don't want to talk about as parents, and those are the things that make us feel bad or we're a little bit ashamed of or feel guilty that we're not getting it, or we think that at least we're not getting it right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing. We think we aren't getting it right, but as long as we're doing our absolute best and communicating with our kids and really, really trying, we're probably getting it a lot more right than we think we are.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Yes.
Yeah.
We're hard on ourselves.
We are, absolutely. So you have 4 kiddos and they have been your inspiration and your drive to do more about this learning and figuring out how to coach parents.
Yes, I do have 4 kids, and it's hard for me to say this, and it gives me a little twinge, but they're all grown now. My youngest is 23 and my oldest is 29. And so we were going through, I homeschooled for 18 years, and I had a child graduating every other year. And so that was our life, for what, 8 years. And it was just really it's a busy time. There's lots of change and transition, and come with that comes their own personalities. And I'm like, it's easy for me to think, okay, when we first started homeschooling, I really wanted to do like one and done, figure it out for one, and then they all do it. Mm-hmm. And that's not realistic. But I was holding on to that for a period of time. And then it was just, I'm going to be honest, it was a disaster. Uh-huh. So I had to change the way that I was looking at them, because they are individual. They have their own personality traits. They have the way that they learn best. And I was like, darn it, this doesn't fit in to the way I wanted it to be. But then that's when I realized it wasn't about me.
Mm-hmm. So did your children ever go to a public school? You said 18 years, but there's 12 years of schooling, and so that sounds like straight in. So you were a social worker in school, you were in the school system. Why did you choose to, from the start, it sounds like, keep your kids at home and do it yourself instead of take them to work with you?
There were a couple of things that happened along the way. And as a school social worker, I was seeing what was going on with the kids in school. And, there was just, especially for those kids who maybe learned a different way. And I was seeing them being left behind. And it wasn't because the school wasn't trying or anything like that, but they really are looking at educating the masses. And so sometimes kids can be left behind. They can be overlooked. And And I didn't want that for my kids. I wanted them to be able to have this chance, even though as what I said earlier, I wanted to figure it out for one and then have all of them be like that. So I was in that mindset too. But what really drove me to keep them at home was that I wanted them to have the ability to love to learn and to do it in the way that best fit them. And so I had to deconstruct my view of education too, which is what I did in those very beginning years. And yeah, so that's really one of the reasons why I wanted to keep them at home, is to give them the opportunity to explore the world. And, I wanted to be able to go on field trips, and I wanted to do all of these things to open up the world to them and not just feel like they had to get something from a book.
So were you full-time at school when you started working with your children?
I was, and then I was pregnant with my fourth, and I was like, I just can't do this anymore because I had three kids, 5 and under, and expecting my fourth, and I was like, it was too much. So I came home from work, and then, I've been at home ever since.
So you weren't actually
That's
homeschooling
awesome.
while you were being the counselor. You left that to be the homeschool parent.
I did, yes, because I had a little bit of overlap with kindergarten for my oldest daughter, so I was doing that as well as homeschooling her, but it was just for like 2 or 3 months, and because I just
Because you were
realized I
actually
couldn't
making
do
me
that.
feel kind of like, wow, Christina was a teacher. Is like, how did you do that with 4 kids when at the time when we had 2? It's like we
Yeah.
couldn't have done that with 2. So okay, you left the school system. Good. So now we don't have to feel so bad because she was working.
No,
Okay.
please don't. Yes, because I only had to do that for like 2 months, and then I realized that this wasn't going to work if I was working full time. But I know parents, and I've mentored parents who have
Mhm.
they've been working full time jobs, and then they've also been homeschooling, and my hat's off to them because it's not easy.
Yeah. But it's possible.
It is
That's
It
possible.
is possible, and they prove that,
Yeah.
and they're very heart-centered and very connected to their kids, and kudos to them for doing it.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. Yeah, because that's one of the questions that I do get as well, is like, but I have to work. How am I going to do this? I mean, part of the blessing, the silver lining of that thing that happened a few years ago was that people did figure out how to work at home or have a hybrid kind of work. So they are more home with their kids and things like that. So that was a blessing in disguise for a lot of families.
And also that homeschooling doesn't have to be 7 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. You can have
They
your
realize,
schooling in the evening because there's a lot of kids who actually learn better in the evening. You were talking about personality. So
yeah,
some kids are not morning kids. Dragging them out of bed and sending them to school is not a good thing. And then in
not a
the
good
afternoon,
fit.
they come alive and they blossom during the afternoon. So, that's one of the things that we talk about is how individualized the children are, and to individualize their education isn't really that difficult.
Right, and I'll be honest with you, as an adult, I'm not a morning person,
Mhm.
and so it was hard for me to think that I needed to be doing this from like 8 to 4 or 8 to 3 or whatever the time period was. And so
Right.
we did have a lot of flexibility in our schooling. And it was, partly was because that fit me best as well. And, so being able to figure that out and figure out how my kids best learned was really a blessing for all of us.
Yeah. And that's one thing I wanted to touch on, because you did say, oh, I thought I was going to figure out, and then this one model would work for all 4 kids kind of thing. And it really does go back to those learning styles, that different kids learn differently. They need different ways of interacting. It's not that you only want to teach in that style because they need the experiences, but you want to reach them where they are as much as possible. So that is a stumbling block, and I'm glad you were figuring it out, and you're encouraging other parents how to figure that out as well.
Well, and I think what happened too is I brought certain expectations, not even from schooling, but from other people that I met in the homeschooling community. And they would talk about, because I'm such a researcher. So before I even started homeschooling, I had read all the books that were available. I had talked to several people either in my church or in the homeschool community that I had joined a couple of groups before I even started homeschooling, because I wanted to find out, what is this all about? What am I getting into? And can
Mhm.
I actually do it?
Yeah.
And so it was really helpful to have those conversations. But I was taking things from them and thinking this was going to work in my family. And, one of the parents I met, and I remember she was just very vivacious and really engaging. And she came and she did a whole session at a group meeting that I had. And she was talking about how she teaches her kids with games. And so, they would learn math through that, and they would learn, just some of those basic, wonderful skills. And even like she did this with reading comprehension. And so I tried that, and I realized I don't like games. So it's going to be hard to use this as the foundational block of our homeschooling, because that just wasn't me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well, because different learning teaching styles show up in homeschooling too. And another one of these myths is that people think that homeschool has to be like the 6 to 8 hours a day, like we were talking about. And so they try and bring school home. They try and replicate what happens at school at home. And you kind of talked about how you were trying to do that, is like put all of your kids and then to have them do the same kind of a thing. And once you get the kids home, you realize real quickly that just doesn't work. There's
Right.
and there are so many more effective ways. And the next thing you talked about was getting your kids to love learning, because once they get that love learning and they get out of that school model, then they start pulling what they want to learn, and they use their passions and what they're having fun with to bring learning to them. It's like, oh wow, this is a lot of fun. And then they start learning how to do that, and that brings in other learning opportunities. So it's not replicating school at home,
Not at
which
all.
in the early days of homeschooling people really tried to do. And there's still a lot of that out there, like with homeschool pods, where they send the kids to different pods for several hours a day and try and replicate school in different people's homes, kind of a way. So there's lots of different ways to do it, but finding that individualness of the children and drawing on their strengths really helps a lot.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking, as you were saying that, one of the things that we found is, my third child, my oldest son, really has an interest in politics, and, and also just in history. And so he created in high school, I think he was a sophomore in high school. He came to me one day and he said, I want to learn all about the European royal families. And so he came, and so he showed me the books that he wanted to use, what he was going to do. And so we came up with this whole course, and it was really based on his interest in figuring out like how the royal families of Europe are connected, and their lineage. And so it was really, I learned a lot going through it, and I was really learning from him. And that was from his enthusiasm about something that I wouldn't have even thought about. And was that a traditional course that they would teach in high school? Obviously not, right? But he really put together something that was very comprehensive. And to this day, he'll go back and say, remember when we talked about whatever? And at this point, I don't remember, but I'm like, oh yeah, but that was something that had stuck with him. And then he put together another course his junior year, and that was all around, the history of politics in the United States. And so it was just incredible. And again, I learned so much, and I learned that from him, and something that was really of interest to him.
That is awesome and amazing, because I mean, even though it's not a regular course in our American schools, he still learns so much, not only just research skills, writing skills, putting things together, all of those kinds of things, but now he has a knowledge of the world that a lot of people don't have, that he can go and talk to different people about and be interesting and things. So that is wonderful.
So, oh, you go.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, because one of the things that we also kind of hear lots of times is like, how do you do 4 kids at once? One or two, absolutely, that's easy to do. But 4 kids, what was the key for you? How did you figure out how to do 4 kids at once in their learning?
So that was, I think, partly where initially I wanted everybody to kind of do the same thing. So, and I realized early on that we weren't able to do that. We had a curriculum that, we would all come together, and we would have read alouds, and then they would have readers. And, so we would do the read alouds together, and we would do history together. And I found that a little bit overwhelming, not a little bit, it was overwhelming. And so that's
Yeah.
when I decided, okay, so we're going to have to separate things out a little bit. So what I did do is I would have them we would start out with one activity and that would warm us up for the day. And then I would get them started. So there, I knew that there were certain things that they could get started on their own. And so so I would work with one of them and we would work with, like with my oldest daughter, we would start with math. And then with the others, like it might be that they were doing something that they could do on their own, they could do independently. And then I would switch throughout. And then I would give them the individualized attention to get them started on that next subject where they needed more help.
Uh-huh.
And then I would just rotate through. And I do want to go back to what I think Herb had said about like that you don't need to do this for 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And really what I found is, especially for my younger kiddos, that when they were like kindergarten, first, second grade, really we were doing about an hour
Mhm.
of, of work.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the time, what were they doing? They were playing, they were reading, they were doing different things and that's when we would do our trips. We might be going on a field trip, things like that. And then we would talk about it in the car. And even though it was just a conversation, what I was learning from them is what did they retain? What was of interest to them? So they were presenting, they were doing these presentation skills. They were identifying with, for instance, we live close to Williamsburg, so they were able to talk about some of the history and, and really go through that. And then we would tie that into something maybe we read. And, so it's very rich and it's very fluid. So it's not, so sometimes when we were reading in our language arts, also tied into history or into science. And, we did a lot of things like that. And for science, for instance, the kids would keep nature journals, and that was something that we could do together.
Yeah.
So we would take walks in the neighborhood and, we would pick up leaves. And one year they were really into birding. And so we had a bird book. And so we would look at the different birds that we had in our backyard and what types of food did they eat, what types of seeds, and how long do they stay, and, where their nesting was. So we would use observations like that to really enhance whatever we were doing.
Absolutely, yes. And if you think about it, as even classroom teachers, they love it on field trip days because they get to take the classroom learning outside of the classroom and apply it to the real world and things like that. So think about that. It's like you were saying, you can do that every day or every week because that's what your children are interested in, and it ties in. And you as the parent, what they've been learning, so you know how to tie it in. You're like, oh yeah, we just learned about this. How does it connect to this? And just that daily life and learning and connecting it all. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the learning outside of the school of the watching the birds. What do they eat? Where do they nest? When do they leave? Those kind of questions. That keeps the kids learning outside of the school time because it's like, oh hey, look, that bird's there. They'd be out playing. It's like, oh hey, look, it's eating that. So it keeps bringing them back to these learning opportunities throughout the day, and it makes them lifelong learners instead of school time learners.
Exactly. And even trips to the grocery store, we're looking at putting a meal together and looking at learning how to read labels. All of those things, that's health, that's science, it can be math, so you're doing so much. And even they would help me make dinners. And so that's learning how to read a recipe and figure out, sometimes we didn't have all the ingredients. Is there something that we can substitute? And it's just, there's such a wealth there, and it doesn't have to look like school for them to learn.
Absolutely. And that's the big mindset shift that a lot of parents need to kind of move into and move away from whenever they're thinking, oh, how can I do this thing called education at home or home education? Have you noticed a shift in terminology away from homeschool?
Yes, I see, and that seems to be something newer, that we're like, we're educators. And I think it's because it's trying to bring some of that is bringing in, um, validating, the experiences that they have at home. And so, and also I see, a number of the homeschoolers in my area now, what they're doing is they're naming their schools, so it's like, so it's something academy, like mine was Adderman Academy. And, and so that, and then, so that is something that I think is newer that I'm noticing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we call it education at home and not homeschooling, because it's like it's not really
Right.
schooling anymore.
Yeah.
And parents, Christina always says, you're your first and your child's best teacher. They learn the most from their parents. So let's go into a more controversial thing. And I'm gonna
Really?
come at this a little funny. So what about you pigeonholing your children with the DISC personality assessment and narrowing in who they are? And how are you comfortable like setting your kids course by using a personality tool?
Oh, her. Wow. Okay. So what I really like about the disc, because I have a background in neuroscience as well, so I'm neuroscience trained. And what I was finding is, we developmentally, our kids go through certain stages and it looks a certain way, right? And so I think being able to understand how to engage the brain and to be able to understand, especially when our kids get to be tweens and teens, that, their whole brain is being remodeled. And when I understood that, it was like a light bulb went on. And what I was finding with that is that I needed something that was even a little bit more detailed. And so that's where the disc came in. And what I really love about DISC is that you're not just, so DISC stands for four different personality types. And first is the D is for dominant. And these are the kids who seem like the natural born leaders and can seem sometimes bossy at home or they can also question you on the decisions that you're making because they really want to have more of a say. And then I is for that inspiring kid. And I have a kid that falls into each of these and multiple. And so, that my inspiring kid, I never knew who all we were going to have at home. He was like the Pied Piper, because his friends would come over and, and just he's lots of fun. He's also impulsive, so it gave me some insight into instead of being so frustrated with him about his impulsivity, it's just that he really likes to connect with people. So he doesn't always think things through. And so that just gave me some really good information. Then S is supportive. I'm the supportive type. And I'm like, can't we all just get along? I don't like conflict. And so it's like, but as a parent, you need to be able to step up and be the leader and sometimes say, I love you and I still need you to do this.
Yes.
So it gave me some insights into myself and into one of my children who is a very, very much an S, very people pleasing. And then the C is cautious, and they're all about the details and facts. And so for them, a routine is going to be really important. And so what I find is understanding these traits, and you might have a kid who is an I and an S, and then also some C. So when you understand that, then you have a way of being able to connect with them, understand their needs, their emotional needs, their social needs, and then be able to communicate with them in a way that best suits them and understanding yourself, like why am I being triggered by this behavior? And when you don't understand what is underlying the behavior, then we tend to be offended. And so I just feel like it opens up a whole new world of like understanding dynamics and interactions and what their needs are and how we can best meet them while understanding what drives our behavior too. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but I just
Well,
I
it was
really
more of there's sometimes this pushback when you talk about having kids' personality tested about pigeonholing them.
Or
So
labeling them.
labeling
Yeah, it's like,
them.
oh,
So
this is all you expect of them now. And it's like,
no, that's just a
no.
baseline. So I remember taking the disc in other things earlier in my life, but it wasn't until later where I was starting to have some issues when I hurt my head that I got into the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs type index.
Yes.
And when I really looked into that and I dug deeper than just, oh, I'm an INFJ and what does that mean? And I really got to looking into the brain stacks and how those different things work. It's like, oh, wow, this explains so much of how I handled problems, of what I went through. It's not who I am. It just, it's like, this is under a default conditions, this is how you're going to come at a problem. And this is how you're going to work through to get to your solution, based on the way your brain tries to work. So when I got involved in that, then I looked into the Enneagram. There's so many other different types of personality tests, and they're all a little different, but it's amazing also how accurate they were in help. And it brought me to a place of more calmness, of acceptance of who I was, because the way I am in some ways made me feel like I was wrong about something, or that I'm not, because hey, that person's like that, I should be like that, and that would make me feel less than. And so once I learned about that, then I'm a big proponent of finding this stuff out for your children, and again, not to pigeonhole them, but to get an idea of where they're at. And I say that once they understand their personality, then they start using their personality to build their character. And character is who they are as they go through life. And so I came at that kind of weird and crookedy because we have gotten a lot of pushback, and it's like, oh, but you're going to label them, you're going to pigeonhole them, and then you're not going to, because if they're introverted, you're not going to expect them to get out in front of people. It's like, no, you realize that introversion is their strength, and that's where they get their energy back from being alone and working through some of their internal stuff. And then they have the energy to go out and build their extroverted character, even though that's not their necessarily personality. So sorry, I like the way, and I knew it was going to make you laugh, but so sometimes when we start talking about personalities with children, people get a little on the touchy side.
Now a few words about vibrant family education.
How many entrepreneurs and business owners start out on this journey to make a better life for their family, only to find that it took so much more time and effort than they were expecting that they had even less time for their family? I know I did.
At Vibrant Family Education, we want to help you reach your family goals while you're still building towards your business goals. We do this by bringing you the third leg of the stool to keep your family upright, family education development.
By bringing your children's education home, you will be able to model your work ethic and family values as you overcome obstacles and challenges to build your business. Instead of learning facts to pass tests, your children can be watching and seeing the dedication it takes to build your business and the legacy you want to create for their future. They will be able to witness the struggles and joys, the wins and the losses, and learn from you how to persevere and grow in life.
Instead of waiting until you get successful to spend more time with your family, start with the end goal in mind and bring your family home. Instead of trying to repair your family after you reach success, let us help you start achieving your family goals from the outset. Learn to be successful with your family now, and no matter what happens in the future, they will be better prepared for life, especially after watching how you cared for and built not only a business, but a healthy, happy, and successful family.
We offer a wide range of educational services, including how to easily get started with homeschooling. Come visit us at vibrantfamilyeducation.com and let us show you how. And now, back to our guest.
Well, and I like though, and I appreciate you sharing that perspective, because I think it is important for parents to understand that it isn't just it's not pigeonholing them or labeling them. It's just giving you a foundational understanding of who they are in certain circumstances. And I'll speak to the introversion. I'm an introvert. And it also, what I see is, and two of my kids are introverts as well. And what I see is that it really helps them to understand, it's like a filter for them. And so they feel better around certain people, and it's understanding their personalities, those people's personalities as well, and how they respond to different things. And so there are some people who are more energy giving, and then there are people who aren't as much. So it helps them to be able to understand who they feel good around. And so in terms of friendships and things, it's like they might want to spend more time with certain people because they don't draw as much energy if that makes sense. And so it's helpful like in just those relationships. And we sometimes say opposites attract, and that is true in certain ways, you know. So for my one daughter who is very introverted, she has a husband. I think if she had an extroverted husband, then that would be really draining for her. And I think it would be sometimes a cause for some tension. And so he's a little bit more extroverted than she is. At the same time, he's not what I would call a real extrovert.
Yeah.
And so it just gives them some insights um, into how they function best, where they thrive. And I really love that about these insights. And I will say about DISC, a lot of times we've heard about DISC specifically in business, and that's how it started. And I have worked with a coach now for the past 3 years, and she actually reached out to one of the companies that sells DISC, and they went through, they completely remodeled it, or not remodeled, redesigned is the word, so that it does look at these familial relationships.
Yeah.
And so that's really nice because then you're getting specific information about how you can use this in your family, like what, and it's very strengths based, you know, so seeing your extroversion or your introversion as a strength, and you know, what is your pace, and how you can, if you're a high D, how can you then work with someone who is an S, you know, they just want everybody to get along. And so, you know, you can look at how you're communicating then. And it's just, it's so rich, as I said, and just the insights that it can bring into any of your relationships and into yourself so that you can have more self-compassion.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what
Absolutely.
I found out, self-compassion. And while it didn't say, hey, this is how Herb is, because I'm quite unique. I'm quite unique. But when I hook up with other people who fit in my same personality type, they're not me. They don't have my experiences. They are their own characters. And it's like sometimes it's really difficult for me to be around other INFJs because it's like, oh wow, they're like me, but they're not like me. And so it's really interesting. So again, it's not a pigeonhole, it's not a label.
Mhm.
It's just a tool to help understand how you make decisions, how you choose what's going to happen, how if you don't choose what's going to happen because of default modes. Yeah, it's they are amazing tools. And for kids, they're awful. Or at least it was for me, like having to try and figure all that stuff out. And it also does change. So children don't have quite as many personality traits. So it's at a smaller level. And then as they get older, as their brains develop, then
They have
more
the
of these,
experiences.
then more of these traits actually do develop. So lots of information there. And so thank you very much for touching that and bringing that to us, because it's better than hearing it just from me.
So when you're working with a family, do you actually go deep into explaining the different profiles and stuff to the parents for the children, or do you actually go and explain it like to the children so they can understand it? How do you kind of work it into the family?
So when I'm working with a family, what I do is I have them take the assessments. And so children, even as young as 4, can take it. And what they do is for that assessment, they use pictures. And so it's them interpreting what they're seeing in the picture, and that gives insights into what their um, personality traits may be.
Right.
And so it's really fascinating. And then I have the parents take it as well. And so then what we do is we have a call to then go through it, and I can plug in the parent's personality and the child's personality, and then we'll see. Okay, so individually, this is what you might be working with, and you know, and then these might be some areas that you want to work on. You know, so again, I use the high D, but it could also be that you have a very cautious parent and they have a very inspiring type child, you know, and so sometimes they're dealing with that impulsivity, that, you know, very high energy. And so it's just working through those dynamics. And so we go through the assessments, and then I have a program that they can take called the Parenting Blueprint, which guides them through communication and the dynamics and how to meet emotional needs. And it's fabulous. because they gain a lot of practical tips along the way and get to play around with them and see what works for their family.
Yeah. And I can really see how, if you're a parent who has to have your child in public school, you're not around them quite as much. This is still going to be super, super helpful, right? Because when they are
Mhm.
around you, you get to really communicate. But if you're in that homeschool situation where you're around them basically 24/7, you're going to want this higher level of communication, this higher level of connection, this higher level of understanding each other so that the family flows and moves easily.
Smooth
There we go.
flows,
Smooth. Yeah,
flows
flows
smoothly.
and smooth. Okay, tongue tied there. But yeah, so because that's one of the things that our parents say is like, I can't imagine being around my kids basically 24/7, right?
Mhm.
And again, it goes back to, do you really connect with them? Do you really communicate with them? Do you really understand them so that you can make that happen? Yeah.
Well, and I think too that there's a misconception that we are around our kids 24/7 when we homeschool, and you're really not. And I'll say this because, there are times that they're working independently and they also have their own interests. So, my younger daughter started an intern. She started volunteering at the library when she was in ninth grade, and so she was gone for those 3 or 4 hours. And my oldest daughter did, when she was a junior in high school, decide that she wanted to go to high school, and so I gave her that opportunity. So she did. She did go to high school full time for her junior and senior year. And so, it was nice though that I had this opportunity to know who she was,
Mhm.
because we had spent time together, so that when she made that transition, then I knew how to support her
Mhm.
with with this whole new world that was being opened up to her,
Right.
and they
Let's
all
talk
started
about
taking
that a little bit.
classes.
What were some of the things that you noticed about when she did go back to school? Did she talk about that? Did she talk about how the children at school were different and how did she handle things differently? What was her experience of homeschooling and then going into the public education system?
So at the time, she wouldn't have said this, but in more recent years, she has said that it was like unfocused chaos.
Yep.
Can we
Uh,
talk about that?
yes. And one of the things that she did say though is that, and she was in higher level classes.
Mhm.
And one of the things that she said is that she's glad that she was in those particular classes because there was more focus uh,
Yeah.
and more support. Um, and she, because some of the kids who were in the different other classes were struggling, because there was a lot of talking and a lot of just interruptions and things like that. So you didn't really get the opportunity to really pay attention to
Uh-huh.
things. And, so at least I think in the classes that she took, she felt like she was getting the support. The pace was very different and that's one thing I'll say in our um, here at home, I would give them extra time because it was important to me for them to understand the material. So if
Mhm.
it took, rather than 2 days, it took a week, I wasn't concerned about that because it was
Right.
really, for me, it was all about them understanding and playing around with the content and the material and really being able to grasp it rather than just fitting into a timeline. So I
Mhm.
will say that that's one way that she struggled because there were firm deadlines, and
Right.
rightfully so. And I do understand that, and I would say that that wasn't something that I was as good at
Mhm.
uh, enforcing at home. And so I would say one thing to the audience, that if you are homeschooling, to make sure that you have a firm deadline. If you want them to have a paper in by a certain time, because that's really a good life skill for them to have, especially if they choose to go to college or they're going to take,
Right.
other courses, whether it's like a vocational training or whatever, that there will be deadlines that they have to face that are not going to be negotiable.
Mhm. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. And because actually I talked with another mom this morning, a get to know you call, and she said the same thing, that whenever her children decided they actually wanted to go back to school, kind of
Mhm.
thing. And so but it's she dealt with it as like, oh, I'm a failure because my kids want to go back to school kind of thing. But it was one of those things that they really had to work as a family and figure out why was it a timing thing? Was it a expense thing? Was it a different kind of learning need kind of thing? So, it's not something that is a failure, right? If you are homeschooling and then your children go back to school, or if they're at school and then they come home, is that people have to remember not to look at these things as failures. It's like, what's best for your child, what's best for your family, and how you support that all together.
And I think it's really exploring, if we talk about wanting our kids to love learning, it's exploring different styles. And Herb, you had mentioned it in the beginning, like just about like the teaching style. And so I have a very specific style. And so for my oldest daughter, she wanted to have more hands-on, and she really wanted, because one of the things that she was trying to do is she wanted to get into a higher tiered college. And so she wanted to be able to focus on expanding her her exposure to different types of teaching. And so that was really helpful for her. And I have my oldest son, my third child. He took a couple of courses at our local community college when he was a junior and senior. And that was because there were specific things that I could, even though he created a couple of his own courses, I really felt like it would be good for him to have that opportunity. And he was all about that. So he took a couple of courses and really enjoyed that. And it gave him confidence. And it gave my daughter confidence as well, that, hey, we're learning, in these different environments and we're doing really well. So it gave them the boost that they needed to know that they could, learn wherever they are.
That's amazing. That is a great message to be able to give your children, or have your children realize that, even though their learning might look a little bit different, they're still learning so much that they're going to be successful in all these different areas.
Yeah, and right now colleges are actually recruiting more heavily from homeschooled children, because they are more independent. They don't have to be coddled as much as a lot of the kids coming out of high school. They are able to think for themselves and articulate, and so colleges are realizing that their homeschooled children are more likely to graduate and do well, and need less handling from the staff, because they are more independent. They do have that sense of responsibility, because they've been doing it for themselves for quite a while, and they also have that love of learning usually. So yeah, right now homeschooled children have an easier time getting into college.
Yes, and I can say, having had 3 of my 4 children in college, that they really, I was positively, I was going to say positively impressed, but that's not quite the right wording for it. But I was impressed with the application process, how easily they made it for a homeschooling child to be able to go through that process. So all 3 of my children who did go to college were able to participate in their scholarship competitions, and they won scholarships for that. And so I don't think that it was a hindrance to them at all. And they were able to write really great essays, and, they were able to present themselves well in interviews, because they were in conversation with adults all the time, you know? So I really, and they, multi-level learning, and there were just so many positives, so many benefits to that. Um, and so the colleges made that process very easy for me too, because I was putting all that together.
Right, exactly.
Conversations with adults and making that easier to get through college. So that's another one of these myths that people have is, oh, my homeschool kids won't be properly socialized. They won't have to go through that trauma-inducing chaos of being picked on and bullied, and 15 minutes of hall time where they're pushed into their lockers. My most traumatic memories are from high school. And so how does that turn into a properly socialized kid? Whereas your homeschool children are talking with adults all the time. They're going out and they're working at the library. She probably got that herself. You didn't have to go force her into that. Your junior in high school decided to go to college. and take classes on his own. And so there's so many different types of socialization that happen through homeschooling because they're in a more of a cooperative environment than they are in a competitive environment. So let's go there a little bit, because I noticed you went like this when I first started talking about
Yeah,
that.
Mindy was holding her head in her hands for our listening only audience.
And as a school counselor, school social worker, I'm sure you saw the socialization horrors firsthand at school.
Well, I think it goes back to what do we consider socialization? So, do you have to only socialize with kids your own age? And I would say no. Yeah, and I don't think that it's always a good idea to only have friends or, be around kids your own age all the time. As an adult, you're not going to be around people who are your exact age, in your job, in your everyday interactions.
Yeah.
So I think it's a benefit to our kids to expose them to different age groups. And socialization, I'll say for my family, was not the difficulty. There are so many great opportunities and more now than even when my kids were growing up. It was hard to stay at home and actually do some of our written work or our book work because there were so many great things outside of home. And so, that was a balance that we really had to work on because, my kids were really great at socializing and they still are. And I'll just say, if you're concerned about your kids being socialized, um, so my oldest daughter is an office manager. My younger daughter is an assistant branch manager for one of our libraries here in our county. My other son is a physical therapist. And, my youngest son is in a master's program getting his his advanced degree in counseling. So, we think about socialization in terms of helping our kids to be successful. And so, I think sometimes we need to re-examine that, about what we want them to be successful at. My kids are really good, and many of the homeschool families, that I know and that we interacted with, their kids are really good at talking to other adults. And I know in public school, when or in the public educational setting, sometimes the kids don't know how to talk to adults. They don't know how to make eye contact. They don't know how to ask questions. They don't know how to follow up with asking what comes next. And so there are gaps in their ability to socialize with people of different age groups.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for saying that, because that's one of those things just blows our mind when we go on a podcast or something, we talk to other people like, well, what about that whole socialization thing? And we come back with an answer very similar to what you just said, because we just know it's not really an issue. It's just one of those pretend myth things that make it so that parents don't want to do this, so they're afraid they're going to mess up their kids, right?
And a lot of homeschoolers, they get their physical activities outside. They'll take their kids to dance, to swimming, to sports. And when and so instead of like, or music, so music in school, typically you go to you go to a music class with the kids in your class, and it's half an hour or 40 minutes or whatever, and it's just your same kids. You take your kids to a music class outside of school, then there's children of all ages, sometimes adults, all in that class learning music together, and they get to see how different people do it, and they get to interact with different people and get help from different age people along. So yeah, there's so many more opportunities for, I would say, proper healthy socialization than just within your specific age group of people at your own maturity level. So as you're working with people of different maturity levels, it's like, ooh, I want to be more mature like that. Ooh, I want to have that. So there's more ability to start building your character by finding things that you admire in different age groups.
Well, and I will say too that I think that sometimes what happens is when we have our kids in same aged groups, that there's even a variation there too. So you have the kids who are more mature and and think a little bit differently, and they don't always feel like they fit in. And so I think that everybody is scrambling, even in those age groups, to figure out where they belong and how they fit. And so And it's, the societal norms that we have around socialization makes it very difficult for our kids to feel like they fit in and to know where they belong. And these are conversations that we can have with our kids when we are having them at home and educating at home, because they can, and again, like I said about introverts and extroverts, and it's,
Yeah.
and having some um, knowledge of their own personalities and what they really enjoy and what they don't enjoy. It's like they're learning all of that, and they get to do it in a safe environment where it's not like what is it, the crabs, like they sometimes we use the example of crabs in a bucket, and you have a
Mhm.
crab that's trying to get out and they're being pulled back down by the other crabs,
Right.
and I think that sometimes when kids are in school, that's something that happens because, if you are someone who really excels at something, it's not always looked upon favorably,
Right.
because and kids are being taught that it's best not to stand out.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And we don't want that. We want them leaving school, leaving their education confident with that love of learning and knowing who they are, right? And if we go back to the college thing, is what those who want to go to college, well, homeschool kids have had a chance to explore lots of different things. So they know usually what they're going to do when they get there. So there's not this exploring and, adding a fifth year or adding extra time because, I was doing this degree and now I'm switching over to this degree kind of thing. They go in a little more grounded and ready to take on that challenge of what they really, really want to do.
I agree with you. Yes. And I think too that they, like you said, they have a chance to explore, and
Mm-hmm.
this is where we have the opportunity as homeschool parents, or home educators, to really look at, giving our kids the tools that they need to be able to thrive, because we're focusing on their futures and giving them stability now so that they can grow and develop, and learn in a healthy, safe environment.
Yeah. So going
Absolutely.
back just a little bit, I also like the
Yeah.
monkey and the ladder study that they did, as well as the crab bucket. So this is, they put a bunch of bananas at the top of a ladder, and they had a room full of monkeys, and a monkey would go up to try and get a banana, and they would spray freezing water on all of the monkeys, and they kept
Mm.
doing that, and then eventually they would bring in, and so all the monkeys stopped going up the ladder to get the banana. And then they would bring in a new monkey, and the new monkey would see that banana up on the ladder and would go for the ladder, and all the other monkeys would beat that monkey up.
Totally.
And they would
Yeah.
slowly swap out all of the monkeys so that none of the monkeys that had ever been sprayed with water were in that group. But anytime they brought in a new monkey that headed for the ladder, all of the monkeys that were used to beating up monkeys going for that ladder would beat up the monkeys. So it got to the point where none of them had the original experience of being sprayed with cold water, but they were all still not letting anybody go up that ladder.
Wow.
And so that's also pretty accurate in what's the school system. It's been around for 60 years. It's like they're not doing anything different. Our parents was like, oh, but I went to school. This is what it was like when I went to school. So you have to go to school. And so that whole having to fit in and not go up that ladder to reach that goal is very prevalent in our school system, as well as the crab pot, where they just out of habit, it's like, oh, there's somebody going up, I'm going to try and get up there and use them to pull them down. So two different ways of looking at it, but they're both very poignant to what's going on.
Yes, and I've never heard about the monkey on the ladder, and I think that's a fabulous analogy for or study to show what can happen. And I think how sad too
Right.
that's what's happening, and we're seeing it in our world.
Yeah. But that's the beauty of having people like you come and coach families and show some and inspire them to do something a little bit different with their family, try something new, communicate better. That's the beauty of having us as parents, as coaches as well, helping families look at the education just a little bit different ways, like what is possible and what do we really want for our children. So thank you for doing your work so that families can communicate and work better together and everything.
Absolutely. And I just want to say too, for the parents who might be listening, and you might not be um, even or considering homeschooling right now, that's not to say that what we've talked about with public education, that you can't make a difference, and I think that that's where the work that we do as parent coaches comes in handy, because your kids can have great experiences. And I think it starts at home and the way that we interact with them, the way that we prepare them and give them, these skills to be resilient and to be able to discuss with them what is going on. So if you're in a place where you feel like you can't homeschool, know that you can still make a huge difference with your kids. And it's all about being heartfelt and really wanting to connect with them on a deeper level.
Yeah, the greatest indicator for children's success, whether they're homeschooled or public school, is their parents'
Their
involvement
involvement.
in their education.
Yeah.
If
Yes.
be involved. If they're at school, don't just, oh, how was your school day? It's like, get involved, pay attention, go to the school events. It's like that.
Yeah.
Being mindful of your children's education and actually showing an interest in it is really the greatest asset your children can have. So even if they are in public school, even if they are homeschooled, be there for them, advocate, be involved.
Absolutely. So Mindy, make sure you tell our audience a little bit of how they can get a hold of you if they want to work with you, things like that. Where can they find you? And yeah, all that.
Yeah. So please, if you have enjoyed what you've been hearing and want to know a little bit more, you can find me at mindygreencoaching.com. That's my website, and there's plenty of free resources there and a way that you can connect with me to get more information. You can also find me on Facebook. I have a page there, Mindy Green Coaching. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, and it's all Mindy Green Coaching. And I would love to have you just reach out to me and let me see how I might be able to help you and support you along this path.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And of course, those links and things will also be in our show notes, but we always like to just say it out loud for those people who are just kind of listening in. So thank you so very, very much. And thank you for being here. I think this has been a wonderful discussion. I loved how we wrapped it around your experience with your children, but then also, this experience you're giving families now of that communication and that connection that's so very, very vital. So thank you for sharing all of that with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mm-hmm.
It has been a pleasure having you on today. Your humor, your smile is just lights up the room. I love how you were able to bring in personality, because we haven't really had many guests who talk about that so very much. And it's just been a pleasure talking with you. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being out there.
I appreciate you both.
All right, audience, that is it for today. Thank you for joining us and sharing in this information. Take these gold nuggets. There have been lots of things dropped in this episode that will help you out, just little small things that you can take and institute in your family and help your children be happy, healthy, and successful into the future. Until next time, bye for now.
Bye for now.
Hello and welcome to Bringing Education Home. I'm Herb.
And I'm Christina. And together we bring you experts